Even the most devoted of God's servants can experience discouragement and exhaustion, allowing their circumstances to overwhelm their daily trust in God. Elijah, a prophet of the northern kingdom of Israel, had witnessed and performed some of the most incredible miracles recorded in the Bible. Nonetheless, not long after, he succumbed to depression and terror. In response to King Ahab's rebellious wickedness, God told Elijah to declare a drought on the land. During this time, God repeatedly demonstrated His provision and care for Elijah, allowing him to drink water from a creek that should have been dry and sending ravens to bring him bread and meat to eat. 1 Kings 17, 1-7. Now Elijah the Tishbite of the people who were staying in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, for sure there will be no rain or water on the grass in the early morning these years, except by my word." And the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "Leave here and turn east. Hide yourself by the river Cherith east of the Jordan. You will drink from the river, and I have told the ravens to bring food to you there." So he went and did what he was told by the word of the Lord. He went and lived by the river Cherith east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and in the evening, and he drank from the river. But after a while the river dried up because there was no rain in the land. Later, the Lord led him to the home of a widow who was suffering the full brunt of the drought. She was down to her last morsels of food. But God gave Elijah the authority to assure her that her flour and oil would be replenished miraculously day after day, and they were. When the widow's son died, Elijah prayed to God to bring him back to life, and he did. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "Get up and go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and stay there. I have told a woman there, whose husband has died, to feed you." So Elijah got up and went to Zarephath. When he came to the city gate, he saw a woman there gathering sticks. He called to her and said, "I ask of you, get me a little water in a jar that I may drink." As she was going to get it, he called to her, "I ask of you, bring me a piece of bread in your hand." But she said, "As the Lord your God lives, I have no bread. I only have enough flour in the jar to fill a hand, and a little oil in the jar. See, I am gathering a few sticks so I may go and make it ready for me and my son. Then we will eat it and die." Elijah said to her, "Have no fear. Go and do as you have said, but make me a little loaf of bread from it first and bring it out to me. Then you may make one for yourself and for your son. For the Lord God of Israel says, the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jar of oil will not be empty until the day the Lord sends rain upon the earth." So she went and did what Elijah said, and she and those of her house ate for many days. The jar of flour was not used up, and the jar of oil did not become empty. It happened as was spoken by the word of the Lord through Elijah. After this, the son of the woman who owned the house became sick. His sickness was so bad that there was no breath left in him. So the woman said to Elijah, "What do I have to do with you, O man of God? You have come to me to have my sin be remembered and to kill my son." He said to her, "Give me your son." Then he took him from her arms and carried him up to the room on the second floor where he stayed. And he laid him on his own bed. He called to the Lord and said, "O Lord my God, have you brought trouble to the woman I am staying with by making her son die?" Then he lay upon the child 3 times and called to the Lord, saying, "O Lord my God, I pray to you, let this child's life return to him." The Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child returned to him, and he became strong again. Elijah took the child and brought him down from the second floor into the house and gave him to his mother. He said, "See, your son is alive." Then the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God. Now I know that the word of the Lord in your mouth is true." 1 Kings 17, 8-24. Then God summoned Elijah to a battle with pagan prophets on a mountainside overlooking the sea. When the competition began, their so-called God did not appear to accept their sacrifice, despite their demonstrative efforts to summon him. When it was Elijah's turn, he prayed, and the living God consumed the prophet's sacrifice with fire from heaven, despite the fact that Elijah had repeatedly soaked the altar in water. So now call together all Israel to meet me at Mount Carmel, and gather together 450 men who speak for Baal, and 400 men who speak for the false goddess Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent news among all the people of Israel, and he brought the men who speak for the false gods together at Mount Carmel. Elijah came near all the people and said, "How long will you be divided between two ways of thinking? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, then follow him." But the people did not answer him a word. Then Elijah said to the people, "I am the only man left who speaks for God, but here are 450 men who speak for Baal. Bring 2 bulls to us. Let them choose 1 bull for themselves and cut it up and put it on the wood, but put no fire under it. I will make the other bull ready and lay it on the wood, and I will put no fire under it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God." All the people answered and said, "That is a good idea." So Elijah said to the men who spoke for Baal, "Choose 1 bull for yourselves and make it ready first, for there are many of you. Then call on the name of your God, but put no fire under it." So they took the bull which was given to them and made it ready. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no voice. No one answered. They jumped up and danced around the altar they had made. At noon, Elijah made fun of them. He said, "Call out with a loud voice, for he is a god. It might be that he is in deep thought or has turned away. He could be away traveling, or it may be that he is asleep and needs to have someone wake him." So they cried with a loud voice. They cut themselves as they had done in the past with swords and spears until blood poured out on them. When noon passed, they cried out until the time for giving the evening gift. But there was no voice, no one answered, no one listened. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come near to me." So all the people came near to him, and he built again the altar of the Lord which had been torn down. Then Elijah took 12 stones by the number of the families of Jacob's sons. The word of the Lord had come to Jacob's sons, saying, "Israel will be your name." With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a ditch around the altar big enough to hold 22 jars of seed. Then he set wood in place. He cut the bull in pieces and laid it on the wood. And he said, "Fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt gift and on the wood." Then he said, "Do it a second time." And they did it a second time. He said, "Do it a third time." And they did it a third time. The water flowed around the altar and filled the ditch also. Then the time came for giving the evening gift. Elijah, the man who spoke for God, came near and said, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel. Let it be known that I am your servant and have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so these people may know that you, O Lord, are God. Turn their hearts to you again." Then the fire of the Lord fell. It burned up the burnt gift, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and it picked up the water that was in the ditch. All the people fell on their faces when they saw it. They said, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." 1 Kings 18:19-39. The crowds not only saw God's fire in Elijah, but they also saw it in his ministry, literally. Elijah became frustrated with his people's spiritual rebellion and enraged by the false prophet of Baal. He faced both forces atop Mount Carmel and defeated the devil's henchmen, despite the fact that they outnumbered him 850 to 1. No one had seen anything like his bravery since the unremembered day David fought Goliath years before. And, like the underdog David, Elijah confronted his adversary with zeal. His gaze was drawn to God's majesty, not the number of his adversaries. This heavenly vision provided the fuel that kept his courage burning. Leaders require courage at all times. No one who wishes to effect change can do so without courage. Elijah's heart was filled with courage because 1. His determination outweighed his reservations. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Elijah determined that Baal had to be confronted at all costs. 2. His desire triumphed over his desperation. Despite the danger, Elijah answered to honor Yahweh above all else. 3. His compassion outweighed his dissatisfaction. Despite his dislike for the people's attitude, Elijah desired for them to find and follow Yahweh. While worshiping and praying alone atop the mountain, Elijah mustered the courage to summon fire from heaven. The fire within him drew down God's fire, decisively defeating Baal. Following this incredible display of God's power, he summoned Elijah to perform another miracle. The prophet prayed for the drought to end, and God responded by sending a tiny cloud followed by a torrential downpour. Given all of his success, one would expect Elijah to be brimming with confidence, joy, and praise for the Lord at this point in his life. When he learned that Queen Jezebel had vowed to kill him, he fled to the opposite end of the country, where he sat down under a tree and begged God to take his life. 1 Kings 18:41-46. Then Elijah said to Ahab, "Go up, eat and drink, for there is the sound of much rain." So Ahab went up to eat and drink. But Elijah went up to the top of Carmel. He got down on the ground and put his face between his knees. And he said to his servant, "Go up now and look towards the sea." So he went up and looked and said, "There is nothing." 7 times Elijah said, "Go again." The 7th time he said, "I see a cloud as small as a man's hand coming up from the sea." Elijah said, "Go and tell Ahab, make your war wagon ready and go down so that the rain does not stop you." Soon the sky became black with clouds and wind, and there was much rain. And Ahab went to Jezreel. Then the hand of the Lord was on Elijah. He pulled his clothing up under his belt and ran before Ahab to Jezreel. 1 Kings 18:1-9. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done. He told her how Elijah had killed with the sword all the men who spoke for Baal. Then Jezebel sent news to Elijah saying, "So may the gods do to me and even more if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Elijah was afraid. He got up and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba of Judah, he left his servant there, but he himself traveled for a day into the desert. He came and sat down under a juniper tree. There he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough now, O Lord, take my life, for I am not better than my fathers." When he lay down and slept under the juniper tree, an angel touched him. The angel said to him, "Get up and eat." Then Elijah looked and saw by his head a loaf of bread made ready on hot stones, and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, because this traveling is too hard for you." So he got up and ate and drank, and he went in the strength of that food for 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. He came to a cave and stayed there. The word of the Lord came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah said, "I have been very careful to serve the Lord, the God of all. For the people of Israel have turned away from your agreement. They have torn down your altars and have killed with the sword the men who speak for you. Only I am left, and they want to kill me." Fortunately, that is not the end of the story. God did not abandon Elijah when he discovered him, to put it mildly, not at his best. No, the Lord picked him up, tossed him back into the fray, provided him with invaluable assistance in the form of the prophet Elisha, and then whisked him away to heaven in a whirlwind. 1 Kings 19:11-18. So the angel said, "Go and stand on the mountain before the Lord." And the Lord passed by. A strong wind tore through the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, the earth shook, but the Lord was not in the shaking of the earth. After the earth shook, a fire came, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a sound of gentle blowing. When Elijah heard it, he put his coat over his face and went out and stood at the opening of the hole. Then a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very careful to serve the Lord, the God of all. For the people of Israel have turned away from your agreement. They have torn down your altars, and they have killed with the sword the men who speak for you. Only I am left, and they want to kill me." The Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, set apart Hazael to be the king of Syria. Set apart Nimshi's son Jehu to be the king of Israel. And set apart Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah to speak for God in your place. Jehu will kill the one who gets away from the sword of Hazael. Elisha will kill the one who gets away from the sword of Jehu. But I will leave 7,000 in Israel whose knees have not bowed down in front of Baal, and whose mouths have not kissed him." 2 Kings 2:11. And it came to pass as they still went on and talked, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire, and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. We are human just like the prophet Elijah. We become exhausted, and when our minds and bodies tire, we can become overwhelmed. However, the God who created us, Psalm 103:14, "For he knoweth our frame, he remembereth that we are dust." God never forgets his promises to us, even when our memory of God's great kindness fades. The prophet Elijah was aware of Israel's idolatry. He was aware that the time for judgment had arrived. He also knew that drought and famine were on their way to devastate Israel. He knew because he had declared God's judgment. This all happened during a very sad period in Israel's history, when the people had all but turned their backs on God and their king had openly and boldly sinned against the Lord. Imagine the bravery it took for one man to pray for judgment on his own people, confront a wicked king, and then stand before hundreds of false prophets and question their piety. Although the Lord took Elijah to heaven a long time ago, this courageous prophet continues to proclaim that true leadership may require standing alone and speaking difficult truths.